In the summer of 1888, when the territorial winds of New Mexico carried whispers of statehood and progress, there existed a place where time seemed frozen in perpetual devotion. The Monastery of Our Lady of Sorrows stood sentinel against the high desert landscape, its adobe walls weathered by decades of relentless sun and winter storms that swept down from the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. Built in 1843 by Franciscan missionaries, the monastery had served as a beacon of faith for the growing community of Santa Fe. The structure rose from the earth like a fortress of prayer, its bell tower piercing the endless sky above the Rio Grande Valley. Within its walls, 27 nuns had dedicated their lives to contemplation, service, and the sacred rituals that marked each passing day. Mother Superior Esperanza Delgado had governed the sisterhood for nearly 2 decades, her stern countenance and unwavering faith commanding respect from both the religious community and the townspeople of Santa Fe. The nuns followed a strict regimen of prayer, work, and silence, their days beginning before dawn with lauds and ending after compline in the chapel's flickering candlelight. The monastery's reputation for piety and charitable works had drawn benefactors from across the territory, their donations funding the construction of additional dormitories, a scriptorium, and an extensive library filled with religious texts and historical chronicles. Local families often sent their daughters to receive education from the learned sisters, and the sick frequently sought healing remedies prepared in the monastery's herb gardens. Yet beneath this veneer of sanctity, something darker had begun to take root in the summer months of 1888. The townspeople first noticed the absence of the familiar morning bells that had called the faithful to prayer for over 4 decades. The silence stretched through days, then weeks, as curious residents gathered outside the monastery's iron gates, finding them inexplicably locked. Father Miguel Herrera, the aging priest who served as chaplain to the sisterhood, had not been seen since his weekly visit in early July. His modest quarters in town remained undisturbed, his personal effects suggesting a sudden and unplanned departure. The territorial authorities received concerned reports from merchants who had failed to receive their customary orders for supplies and provisions. Dr. William Thornton, the territorial physician who had attended to the sisters' medical needs for over a decade, grew increasingly alarmed when his scheduled visits went unanswered. His written correspondence to Mother Superior Delgado remained unopened, accumulating like autumn leaves beneath the monastery's heavy wooden doors. The silence had become absolute, impenetrable as the desert heat that shimmered above the adobe walls. Local folklore had always surrounded the remote monastery with tales of miraculous healings and unexplained phenomena. Stories passed down through generations of Hispanic families who had lived in the shadow of the Sangre de Cristo range. Some claimed to have witnessed strange lights emanating from the chapel windows during the darkest hours before dawn, when decent people remained safely in their beds. The monastery's isolation had been both blessing and curse, providing the sisters with the solitude necessary for their contemplative life, while leaving them vulnerable to the harsh realities of frontier existence. Attacks by hostile Apache bands had ceased years earlier, but the desert itself remained an unforgiving adversary, capable of claiming lives with equal measures of drought and flood. Territory Governor Edmund Ross received his first official report regarding the monastery's unusual silence on the 15th of August, feast day of the Assumption. The dispatch, written in the careful hand of Sheriff Thomas Catron, described the growing unrest among Santa Fe's Catholic population and requested authorization to investigate the circumstances surrounding the sisterhood's mysterious disappearance from public life. By late August, the situation had attracted attention from territorial newspapers, their reporters gathering outside the monastery gates like carrion birds drawn to some unseen tragedy. The Santa Fe New Mexican published increasingly speculative articles about the fate of the 27 nuns. their stories fanning the flames of public curiosity and supernatural speculation throughout the territorial capital. Archaeological evidence from the period suggests that the Monastery of Our Lady of Sorrows occupied a site of profound historical significance, built upon foundations that predated Spanish colonization by several centuries. Native Pueblo peoples had considered the location sacred, using it for ceremonial purposes that remained largely unknown to the European settlers who later claimed the land. The monastery's extensive archives, maintained meticulously by Sister Catalina Vasquez, contained records dating back to the earliest days of Spanish settlement in the region. These documents included land grants, baptismal records, and detailed accounts of territorial politics that would prove invaluable to future historians studying the complex cultural dynamics of 19th century New Mexico. Mother Superior Delgado had been known for her scholarly pursuits, often spending long hours in the scriptorium copying ancient texts and maintaining correspondence with religious authorities throughout the American Southwest. Her personal journal, written in a mixture of Spanish and Latin, documented not only the daily life of the sisterhood, but also her growing concerns about strange occurrences within the monastery walls. The nuns had maintained a tradition of perpetual adoration, ensuring that at least one sister remained in prayer before the Blessed Sacrament at all hours of the day and night. This practice, while common in many religious communities, had taken on particular significance at the Santa Fe Monastery, where the sisters reported experiencing profound spiritual visions during their nocturnal vigils. Local indigenous communities had long avoided the area surrounding the monastery, their elders speaking in hushed tones about disturbed spirits and ancient curses that clung to the high desert landscape like morning mist. These beliefs, dismissed by territorial authorities as primitive superstition, would later prove remarkably prescient as the mystery of the disappeared sisterhood deepened. The monastery's water supply came from a natural spring that emerged from the mountainside, its flow remaining constant even during the most severe droughts that periodically plagued the territorial Southwest. The nuns had constructed an elaborate system of channels and cisterns to capture and distribute this precious resource throughout their cloistered community, creating gardens that bloomed impossibly in the harsh desert environment. Sister Maria Elena Montoya, the monastery's youngest member at 22 years of age, had joined the sisterhood only months before the mysterious silence began. Her family in Albuquerque had received no word from their daughter since her solemn profession of vows in the spring. Their letters of inquiry met with the same impenetrable silence that had descended upon the entire religious community. The approaching feast of Our Lady of Sorrows, scheduled for the 15th of September, held particular significance for the monastery that bore her name. Territorial residents had grown accustomed to the elaborate processions and public celebrations that marked this holy day, their absence serving as another stark reminder of the unexplained circumstances that had befallen the cloistered sisterhood. As summer surrendered to autumn in the high desert country of northern New Mexico, the silence emanating from the Monastery of Our Lady of Sorrows had become more than mere absence of sound. It had transformed into something tangible and oppressive, a presence that seemed to press against the consciousness of all who ventured too near the adobe walls where 27 nuns had simply vanished from the world of the living. The morning of September 3rd, 1888, brought unseasonably cool temperatures to the high desert plateau surrounding Santa Fe, as if the very air itself had grown weary of the mystery that shrouded the silent monastery. Sheriff Thomas Catron, accompanied by Deputy Marshal James Morrison and territorial physician Dr. William Thornton, approached the iron gates with a mixture of official authority and barely concealed apprehension. Governor Ross had finally authorized the investigation after mounting pressure from both religious authorities and concerned citizens threatened to undermine territorial stability. The Catholic Church, through Archbishop Jean-Baptiste Salpointe, had formally requested intervention, citing the unprecedented nature of an entire monastic community's disappearance from communication with ecclesiastical hierarchy and the outside world. The gates, forged by local craftsmen from iron ore mined in the nearby hills, stood open for the first time in nearly 2 months, their hinges protesting with metallic groans that echoed across the monastery courtyard. The investigators paused at the threshold, each man perhaps sensing that they were about to cross into territory where conventional explanations might prove inadequate. Dr. Thornton carried with him a leather medical bag containing instruments of his trade, though he privately questioned what healing arts might be required in a place that had fallen under such profound and inexplicable silence. His previous visits to the monastery had always been met with warmth and gratitude from the sisterhood, their faces reflecting the serene contentment that came from lives devoted entirely to prayer and service. The central courtyard, normally alive with the quiet bustle of monastic life, presented a scene of perfect preservation, frozen in time. Herb gardens showed evidence of recent tending, their neat rows of medicinal plants betraying no sign of neglect or abandonment. Water still flowed from the stone fountain at the courtyard's center, its gentle murmur the only sound to break the oppressive silence. Sheriff Catron's weathered boots echoed against the flagstone pathway as the trio made their way toward the main building, their footsteps seeming unnaturally loud in the absence of human voices or activity. The adobe walls bore witness to decades of desert weather, their surfaces marked by the subtle patterns of expansion and contraction that spoke of countless seasonal cycles. The chapel doors stood ajar, revealing glimpses of flickering candlelight that suggested recent human presence, yet no figures moved within the sacred space. The investigators exchanged glances, each man perhaps wondering if they might discover the sisterhood engaged in some extended period of prayer or meditation that would explain their prolonged absence from public life. Deputy Morrison, a veteran of numerous territorial disputes and Apache raids, found his usual confidence shaken by the profound stillness that permeated every corner of the monastery grounds. His hand instinctively moved to the Colt revolver at his hip, though he could not have explained what threat he expected to encounter within these walls dedicated to peace and contemplation. The refectory tables remained set for the evening meal, their wooden surfaces bearing plates and cups arranged with the precise attention to detail that characterized monastic life. Food had been placed as if in expectation of the community's arrival, though the bread had long since hardened and the water had grown stagnant in ceramic vessels. Dr. Thornton's medical training had prepared him to confront death in its various forms, from frontier violence to territorial diseases that claimed lives with ruthless efficiency. Yet, the complete absence of any human presence, living or dead, presented a mystery that challenged his understanding of natural order and scientific observation. The dormitory corridors stretched before them like pathways into an abandoned dream, their walls lined with small cells that had housed the 27 members of the sisterhood. Each room remained perfectly arranged, personal belongings placed with the careful attention to order that reflected the spiritual discipline of their former occupants. Sister Esperanza's quarters, befitting her position as Mother Superior, contained a modest desk covered with documents and correspondence that suggested she had been interrupted in the midst of important work. Her handwriting, normally precise and controlled, showed signs of increasing urgency in the final entries, though the meaning of her cryptic references remained unclear to the investigating team. The monastery's library presented perhaps the most disturbing evidence of the sisterhood's sudden disappearance, with books left open on reading tables and manuscripts abandoned mid-sentence in the scriptorium. Candles had burned down to mere stubs, their wax pooled on wooden surfaces in patterns that suggested they had been left unattended for considerable periods. Father Herrera's private quarters within the monastery complex revealed signs of hasty departure, with personal items scattered about and his breviary lying open to prayers for the dead. A partially written letter on his desk began with expressions of deep concern about developments within the sisterhood, though the specific nature of his worries remained frustratingly vague. The investigation team discovered that the monastery's water supply continued to flow freely from the mountain spring, ruling out drought or contamination as explanations for the community's disappearance. The gardens showed evidence of recent watering, suggesting that someone had maintained the monastery's agricultural activities until very recently. In the chapel, the investigators found evidence of recent prayer activity, with candles burned down to various lengths and prayer books left open to specific passages dealing with spiritual warfare and protection from evil influences. The altar itself remained properly arranged for Mass, though no priest had celebrated the sacred mysteries within these walls for months. The monastery's bell tower provided a commanding view of the surrounding desert landscape, revealing no signs of violence or external disturbance that might explain the sisterhood's fate. The bronze bells hung silent in their wooden framework, their traditional call to prayer replaced by the endless whisper of desert winds through the mountain passes. Sister Catalina's meticulous archives contained the final entries in the monastery's official records, dated to the early days of July. Her careful handwriting documented increasingly strange occurrences within the community, including reports of unexplained sounds during the night hours and disturbing dreams that seemed to afflict multiple members of the sisterhood simultaneously. The kitchen areas revealed evidence of meal preparation that had been abandoned mid-process, with ingredients laid out for bread making and vegetables partially prepared for the evening meal. The preservation of these domestic details created an atmosphere of interrupted normalcy that proved more unsettling than any signs of violence or struggle. As afternoon shadows began to lengthen across the monastery courtyard, the investigators realized that their initial survey had raised more questions than answers. The complete absence of the 27 nuns, combined with the perfect preservation of their daily environment, suggested circumstances that challenged conventional understanding of human behavior and natural law. The approaching evening brought with it a palpable sense of unease that seemed to emanate from the very stones of the monastery walls, as if the ancient adobe remembered secrets that living memory had failed to preserve. The investigators prepared to spend the night within the silent cloisters, hoping that darkness might reveal truths that daylight had concealed. As twilight descended upon the high desert landscape surrounding the Monastery of Our Lady of Sorrows, Sheriff Catron and his companions made preparations to maintain an overnight vigil within the walls that had witnessed the unexplained disappearance of 27 souls. The decision to remain through the hours of darkness had not been made lightly, each man sensing that the monastery's secrets might reveal themselves only when daylight no longer offered its comforting protection. Dr. Thornton established a makeshift examination area in the monastery's infirmary, his medical instruments arranged with the methodical precision that had served him well throughout years of frontier practice. The room contained evidence of recent pharmaceutical activities, with herbs and medicinal preparations arranged as if Sister Marguerite, the community's healer, had simply stepped away momentarily from her sacred work. Deputy Morrison took responsibility for securing the monastery's various entrances, though he privately questioned what threats might emerge from within walls that had already claimed their mysterious toll. His military experience during territorial conflicts had taught him to trust his instincts, and those instincts now screamed warnings about dangers that remained frustratingly undefined and intangible. The investigators had discovered additional evidence throughout their afternoon exploration, including personal journals maintained by several members of the sisterhood that documented a gradual deterioration in the community's spiritual equilibrium during the weeks preceding their disappearance. These handwritten accounts, penned in a mixture of Spanish, Latin, and English, painted a disturbing picture of mounting psychological pressure within the cloistered walls. Sister Maria Teresa's journal contained increasingly frantic entries describing dreams that plagued not only her own sleep, but seemed to afflict the entire community, with shared visions of figures moving through the monastery corridors during the deepest hours of night. Her handwriting, normally controlled and elegant, had deteriorated into barely legible scrawls that suggested extreme psychological distress. The chapel's interior revealed additional mysteries as evening approached, with shadows gathering in corners that seemed to possess substance and weight beyond mere absence of light. Votive candles continued to burn with flames that flickered in patterns unrelated to any detectable air currents, their wax dripping in formations that resembled tears frozen in perpetual descent. Mother Superior Delgado's private journal, discovered locked within a wooden chest in her quarters, contained the most disturbing revelations about the final weeks of the sisterhood's existence. Her scholarly Latin prose described phenomena that challenged both religious doctrine and rational explanation, including references to presences that had begun manifesting within the monastery's most sacred spaces. The evening meal preparations discovered earlier took on new significance as darkness fell. The abandoned food and table settings suggesting that the sisterhood's disappearance had occurred with stunning suddenness. No evidence suggested struggle or resistance, as if the 27 nuns had simply chosen to step from the physical world into some realm beyond human understanding. Dr. Thornton's examination of the dormitory areas revealed personal belongings, arranged with the careful attention to detail that characterized monastic life. Yet subtle disturbances suggested that the final hours had been marked by increasing agitation. Bedsheets showed signs of restless sleep, and several cells contained evidence of midnight prayer vigils that had extended far beyond normal devotional practices. The monastery's water supply, flowing continuously from the mountain spring, had taken on an unusual quality as darkness approached. Its normally clear stream showing subtle discoloration that could not be attributed to mineral content or seasonal variations. The taste remained pure, yet something indefinable in its essence suggested contamination by influences that transcended physical chemistry. Sheriff Catron's investigation of the monastery's financial records revealed no irregularities that might explain the sisterhood's disappearance through mundane criminal activity. Donations from territorial benefactors had remained steady, and the community's modest expenses for food and supplies showed no unusual patterns that might indicate preparation for departure or relocation. The territorial archives contained correspondence between Mother Superior Delgado and ecclesiastical authorities in Santa Fe and Albuquerque that documented her growing concerns about developments within the monastery during the months preceding the mysterious silence. Her letters, written in formal ecclesiastical Spanish, described spiritual challenges that seemed to transcend normal religious struggles with faith and obedience. As midnight approached, the investigators began to experience phenomena that challenged their commitment to rational explanation and scientific observation. Sounds emerged from empty corridors that resembled footsteps, whispered prayers, and the rustle of heavy religious habits moving through spaces where no living persons could be detected by conventional means. The chapel's atmosphere grew increasingly oppressive as the night hours advanced, with temperatures dropping to levels that seemed inconsistent with the desert climate's typical patterns. Candle flames elongated into unnatural shapes that cast shadows bearing little resemblance to the objects that should have produced them, creating an environment where reality itself seemed subject to alteration. Doctor. Thornton's medical training had not prepared him for symptoms that manifested without identifiable patients, yet he began documenting physical sensations that suggested the presence of individuals who remained invisible to direct observation. His clinical notes described atmospheric pressure changes, temperature variations, and electromagnetic disturbances that his instruments registered despite the apparent absence of any causative factors. The monastery's bell tower, silent throughout the daylight hours, began producing faint resonances as midnight approached, though no human agency could be detected operating the bronze instruments that had called generations of faithful to prayer. The sounds emerged as whispers rather than proclamations, their tonal qualities suggesting voices raised in harmonies that belonged to no earthly choir. Deputy Morrison's patrol of the monastery grounds revealed evidence of recent activity that had not been present during their afternoon investigation, including footprints in the herb gardens and disturbances in the fountain's water that suggested movement by unseen figures. His military experience had taught him to distinguish between imagination and genuine threat, yet the evidence before him challenged those hard-won skills. The scriptorium, where Sister Catalina had maintained the monastery's extensive archives, showed signs of continued literary activity despite the documented absence of any living scribes. Manuscripts left incomplete during the afternoon investigation had acquired additional text written in familiar handwriting, though the content dealt with subjects that seemed to transcend normal religious scholarship. As the night vigil continued toward dawn, the investigators found themselves confronting the possibility that the Monastery of Our Lady of Sorrows had become something more than a crime scene or missing persons case. The evidence suggested that 27 souls had not simply vanished, but had undergone some transformation that placed them beyond the reach of territorial law and medical science. The approaching hours before dawn promised to reveal whether the monastery's silence concealed tragedy, miracle, or something that transcended both human categories, challenging the investigators to expand their understanding of reality itself. Within walls that had witnessed decades of prayer and contemplation, forces beyond earthly comprehension had apparently claimed dominion over both the living and the spaces they had once occupied. The territorial authorities would soon face the impossible task of explaining to concerned families and religious superiors what had become of 27 women who had dedicated their lives to serving God in the high desert country of New Mexico. Yet as dawn approached, it became increasingly clear that conventional explanations would prove inadequate to address the mystery that had transformed the Monastery of Our Lady of Sorrows into something that existed beyond the boundaries of ordinary human experience. The pale light of dawn, on September 4th, 1888, cast long shadows across the Monastery of Our Lady of Sorrows as the investigating team prepared to document their findings and confront the impossible task of explaining what they had witnessed during their night-long vigil. The approaching sunrise brought no relief from the oppressive atmosphere that had settled over the ancient adobe walls, like a shroud woven from prayer and mystery. Sheriff Catron's official report, filed with territorial authorities later that morning, would become one of the most controversial documents in New Mexico's legal archives, its contents challenging the boundaries between criminal investigation and supernatural inquiry. His careful prose described evidence that resisted conventional interpretation while maintaining the objective tone required by territorial law enforcement protocols. Dr. Thornton's medical observations, recorded in precise clinical language, documented physiological phenomena that occurred without identifiable patients or causative agents, including temperature variations, atmospheric pressure changes, and electromagnetic disturbances that his instruments detected despite the apparent absence of any living subjects. His professional reputation would never fully recover from the implications of his scientifically rigorous yet impossible conclusions. The final hours before dawn had brought revelations that would haunt the investigators for the remainder of their lives, as the monastery revealed secrets that had accumulated within its walls like sediment deposited by decades of prayer, sacrifice, and spiritual devotion. The sisterhood's fate had become clear, though the mechanisms of their transformation remained beyond the grasp of territorial understanding. Mother Superior Delgado's final journal entry, discovered that morning, written in her unmistakable hand, despite the documented absence of any living scribes, provided the most disturbing insights into the community's final days. Her Latin text described a spiritual breakthrough that had elevated the entire sisterhood beyond the limitations of physical existence, achieving a form of perpetual contemplation that transcended earthly constraints. The 27 nuns had not vanished in any conventional sense, but had undergone a transformation that placed them simultaneously within and beyond the monastery walls, their prayers continuing in harmonies that human ears could barely detect. Their physical forms had become unnecessary vessels for souls that had achieved the ultimate goal of monastic life, complete union with the divine through absolute abandonment of worldly concerns. Sister Catalina's archives contained the final documentary evidence of this impossible transition. Her meticulous records, tracking the gradual dissolution of barriers between the spiritual and material realms within the monastery's increasingly sacred spaces. Her scholarly observations described phenomena that challenged both Catholic doctrine and territorial law, documenting miracles that exceeded official religious recognition while remaining undeniably real. The investigators discovered that the monastery's water supply had indeed been affected by supernatural influences, its molecular structure altered by prolonged exposure to prayers that had accumulated within the ancient adobe walls until reaching a critical spiritual density. The spring now flowed with water that could sustain forms of life that existed beyond conventional biological understanding. Father Herrera's disappearance had occurred when he attempted to intervene in the sisterhood's transformation, his earthly concerns about ecclesiastical authority and territorial law proving inadequate to comprehend the spiritual forces that had claimed dominion over the monastery. His final letter, completed by an unknown hand, described his voluntary acceptance of the community's transcendent fate, rather than reporting their extraordinary circumstances to unsympathetic authorities. The territorial government's response to Sheriff Catron's report reflected the limitations of secular authority when confronted with phenomena that transcended legal jurisdiction and scientific explanation. Governor Ross ordered the monastery sealed and declared off-limits to civilian investigation, though his official reasoning cited public safety concerns rather than acknowledging the supernatural elements documented by the investigating team. Local Hispanic communities, drawing upon cultural traditions that predated European colonization, accepted the monastery's transformation with greater understanding than their Anglo-American counterparts. Their folklore contained numerous precedents for holy sites that had become bridges between earthly and celestial realms, places where devoted souls could achieve states of existence that surpassed normal human limitations. The Catholic Church's official response remained diplomatically ambiguous, neither confirming nor denying the supernatural elements of the investigation, while quietly transferring ecclesiastical oversight of the monastery to authorities better equipped to handle matters that exceeded normal pastoral responsibilities. Archbishop Salpointe's private correspondence revealed his personal conviction that the sisterhood had achieved a form of mystical union rarely documented in church history. Dr. Thornton's subsequent research into similar phenomena revealed historical precedents throughout the American Southwest, where combinations of geographical factors, indigenous spiritual traditions, and intense Catholic devotion had occasionally produced circumstances that challenged conventional understanding of reality. His unpublished manuscripts, discovered decades later, documented a pattern of transcendent experiences associated with specific locations where multiple spiritual traditions intersected. The monastery's continued existence as a site of unexplained phenomena attracted pilgrims and researchers from throughout the territorial Southwest. Though most visitors reported experiences too subtle for scientific documentation, sensitive individuals described hearing faint singing during certain atmospheric conditions, while others claimed to detect the scent of incense and candle wax emanating from spaces that had been sealed for months. Sister Maria Elena Montoya's family in Albuquerque received a final letter from their daughter, delivered by unknown means to their doorstep on the morning of September 4th. Her carefully penned Spanish text assured them of her continued existence in a state of perfect happiness and spiritual fulfillment, though she could no longer maintain correspondence through conventional postal services. The approaching feast of Our Lady of Sorrows, celebrated throughout the territory on September 15th, took on new significance as communities grappled with the implications of the monastery's transformation. Some viewed the sisterhood's fate as the ultimate expression of religious devotion, while others questioned whether such complete abandonment of earthly existence served God's intended purposes for human life. Archaeological investigations conducted decades later would reveal that the monastery had been constructed upon a site of profound spiritual significance, where prehistoric Native American ceremonies had prepared the ground for forms of consciousness that transcended normal human limitations. The confluence of indigenous traditions and Catholic mysticism had created conditions that allowed devoted souls to achieve states of existence that defied territorial understanding. The territorial press gradually ceased reporting on the monastery's mysteries as editors struggled to present information that challenged their readers' comprehension of reality without undermining social stability. The Santa Fe, New Mexican's final article on the subject, published in October 1888, described the investigative findings in language so cautious and ambiguous that future historians would question whether the events had occurred at all. Modern researchers studying the archived documents from Sheriff Catron's investigation continue to debate the implications of evidence that suggests 27 individuals achieved a form of existence that transcended physical death while remaining connected to earthly spaces through bonds forged by decades of prayer and spiritual discipline. The monastery's silence had revealed not absence, but presence transformed beyond conventional recognition. The legacy of the Monastery of Our Lady of Sorrows endures in the high desert landscape of northern New Mexico, where summer winds still carry whispers of prayers that continue beyond the boundaries of time and mortality. The adobe walls stand as testimony to faith so profound that it ultimately transcended the limitations of human existence, achieving the eternal contemplation that had been the sisterhood's earthly goal. Whether viewed as miracle, mystery, or cautionary tale, the fate of the 27 nuns challenges comfortable assumptions about the boundaries between life and death, faith and reality, temporal authority and eternal truth. In the shadow of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, where ancient spirits had always moved freely between worlds, modern souls had discovered pathways to transcendence that official doctrine had declared impossible, yet undeniably real.